Morning, kids. It's me. Just want to clarify and give you a little bit of background on this induction and deduction stuff we've been talking about and working with this week and last week. First, I've noticed how, in what good faith, most of you are approaching the tasks I've given you. And I appreciate the hard work that you're doing, and I hope it's not making you too crazy. Uh, Remember, and I've said this before, this is not a philosophy or logic class. And I'm not looking for you to get this stuff right necessarily, and I'm probably not even qualified to judge in some cases whether it's right or wrong. It's important to think about the process, what you're doing by playing with induction and deduction and those definitions and those fallacies. In another class, it might be essential to get it right and get the data correct. In my class, we're using this project to focus on the process of how and why we think the way we do. So if you don't get the details exactly right, that's not a big deal in this class. If you don't engage with the process at all and don't do the metacognition, which is thinking about thinking, that's a bigger deal. So in one way, you can think about it like a game, like a puzzle, or like a video game or something like that. But don't make yourselves crazy trying to get this stuff exactly right. What you're doing in my class is we're training our minds to look for certain patterns and then evaluate the patterns and use the tools to the extent that we have them. Here's the way I think about it. I believe, and I believe that Thomas Jefferson and the guys who set this nation up also believed that Americans, and not Americans in particular, but all people in general, have a little spark in them of an ability to understand, to perceive, to draw conclusions, to think clearly, that we're all sort of born with that. I think that's one of the inalienable rights that they talk about, is our ability to think for ourselves. How that got there, I don't know. If you want to say it's the little spark of the divine in you and God gave it to you, that's fine with me. You won't get an argument here. But I believe it's in everyone. The problem in contemporary culture is that that little spark remains dormant until it's activated by training and conscious thought and focus and knowledge. And the problem in our contemporary culture, quite frankly, and anybody who's paying any attention can come to the same conclusion, that our native intelligence is being beaten almost into oblivion by the forces of ignorance out there. Politicians, advertisers, other public figures who lie to us and who think we won't notice that they're lying. It's almost gone. And it's one thing that sets human beings apart from other people. So the process, what I'm asking you to do, is not so much to get this stuff right and make correct judgments about induction and deduction, but to think about the process of how we think. And one way to think about it, and this is the way I think about it, it's like a game. It's an intellectual game, but in a way it's like a video game. You've got the two enemies lined up across from each other. But the problem is all the good weapons are on the side of the forces of ignorance. The forces of ignorance in this culture are winning. There's no doubt about it. And they're winning because those of us on the other side are unarmed. We have no way to fight, so we can't possibly win because we have no weapons. If you want to use the video analogy, the video game analogy I'm making for you. So to have any chance of igniting that spark and letting it grow and become more fully human, we have to get some weaponry. And the weaponry that we get is in training and activating that spark of intelligence that is given to us native but isn't developed until we develop it. And the guys on the other side, the forces of ignorance, are winning because they have all the weapons and they know that we don't have any weapons. So they don't even have to be cautious or careful. And here's a simple example. in earlier generations in this country, even earlier in my lifetime, politicians, for instance, were really careful about lying because they knew there's a possibility they would get caught. Now they don't care. They lie and they don't care that we know they're lying because they know we're not going to do anything about it because they think we don't know how to combat their lies. And in many cases that's true. So the game that we're playing here, and it is a game, and I hope you're enjoying it at least to an extent, is we're developing weapons to fight back against the forces of ignorance who are winning at this point. And the way that we do that is not so much learning, well, this is induction, that's deduction, not learning to make those judgments, but learning to look at how we think and why we think what we think and how we got to those beliefs. That's the piece that's missing. We don't know, we can say what we believe, but we don't know why we believe it, and we don't know how we got to that belief. And so that belief is weak because it has no foundation. We don't know why we believe most of what we believe. We believe it because somebody told us to believe it, or it's the easiest way out of a dilemma, or, you know, the lazy way out of a problem is to say, well, I believe this and leave me alone now. Now, you have to be able to say why you believe it and how you got to that belief. And that's what this is about in my class. In other classes, you know, maybe you need to be a little more precise about your terminology and make more of an effort to get it right. But in my class, all I'm asking is that you make an attempt. I'm not judging your responses on whether they're right or wrong. I'm judging your responses on whether they show an attempt to sharpen up those weapons. Because frankly, folks, it's all we've got. You know, my God-given intelligence is all I've got to fight these people. They've got all the money, they've got all the power. I have no money and no power. I've only got one thing to fight them with. And if I let that one thing wither and die, then, you know, it's a lost cause. It's hopeless. So that's enough preaching at you. But if you like the video game analogy, just think, you know, the bad guys are winning. And what do the good guys do to defeat the bad guys? Is you outsmart them. But what if they know more than you do? What if they've developed their intelligence more than you've developed yours? You can't outsmart them. It's impossible for an uninformed person to outsmart an informed person. It ain't going to happen. So that's what this class is about. I'm going to give you the answer to the little Socrates syllogism by way of an illustration of what I'm talking about. And I know that you're going to think I'm giving away the answer to the folks who haven't participated in the forum yet. Again, that's the wrong way to think about it, but some of you are going to think that. But I used a little Socrates deal for a deliberate reason. If you look at those two syllogisms, the conclusions of both, Socrates is mortal, both of those syllogisms, the conclusion is true. It's a fact. Socrates died, so therefore Socrates was mortal, so therefore the conclusion of both of those syllogisms is true. However, only one of those conclusions is valid. And I'm not just playing words with you here. It's an important distinction. The first one, I think it's the first one, I don't have it in front of me. The valid one is the one that says, all people are mortal, Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates is mortal. That's a valid conclusion because the premises are true. So there's where truth comes in. Truth is applied to your premises, not your conclusion. Your conclusion is valid or invalid. The second one, all mortals are people, Socrates is a person, so therefore Socrates is mortal. Note it comes to the same conclusion, but that conclusion is invalid because one of the premises is untrue or unproven. If you don't like the word truth, think of the word proof, like you prove a conclusion in a scientific experiment or something, which is not a proof but a highly likely possibility, but that's a discussion for another time. So the reason that little Socrates game suits our purpose here so well And this is what I wanted you to get, and I'm giving away the answer now for the folks who haven't participated yet, but it's their loss, not yours. You can reach a conclusion that is true, but is also invalid because of the way you get to it. And you cannot trust an invalid conclusion. It's invalid. It doesn't work. So the point of that whole lesson is to think about how we get to what we believe. Not is it true or false, but how did we get there? Because if the route to the conclusion is suspect, then the conclusion is not to be trusted, even if it's true. So number one, I think it's number one. Forgive me, I don't have them in front of me. I think it's number one is valid because the premises are true. Number two is valid in spite of the fact that one of the premises is false. So number one is an honorable conclusion based on intelligence and insight and examining the way we got to it. Conclusion number two is invalid because the route to the conclusion was faulty. Let me give you an example. You can tell me to believe something, and I can say, oh yeah, that's true, and I can proceed on the basis of some politician telling me something is true, and it may be true, but the politician is an invalid authority. So I'm acting on the basis of an invalid assumption, which is going to get me into trouble sooner or later, even if my conclusion is true. Let's say it is true, and I choose to believe it because the politician tells me to believe it. That's an invalid reason or a faulty reason for believing it. The politician can tell me something's true. I can check it out in the real world by checking my data and come to my own conclusion that it is true, and then that's a valid deductive syllogism. I can trust that. I can go forward on the basis of that being not only true but valid. So you see the difference, I hope. The point of this exercise is how you get to a conclusion makes the entire decision about whether you can trust that conclusion or not for you. Depends upon how you get there. And if you can't look at how you got there, you can't make an educated judgment about whether to trust that conclusion, even if it's true. That's my point. Even if it's true, but you don't know how you got there, then you can't trust the conclusion. If you know how you got there, you can trust the conclusion. This is even in the Bible. Somebody in the Bible says, be always ready to give a reason for the truth that is in you. That means be always able to tell, I should be able to tell you why I believe something is true, and I should be able to tell you how I got there to that truth. If I can't tell you how I got to the truth, or if I'm believing something is true because my mommy told me to believe it, then that's faulty reasoning, and my conclusion, although it may be still true, is invalid. There's a huge difference, and the distinction between validity and invalidity is the important thing to think about here, because validity and invalidity depend, the judgment you'll make about whether a conclusion is valid or invalid is not ultimately decided by the fact that the conclusion may be true in both cases. It's valid or invalid depending on how you got there, on the background steps that you took to get to this conclusion. Okay, and that's what this is about. We're learning to think about the way we think about things and how we arrive at conclusions. So if our thinking is fallacious, it's invalid. It's not to be trusted. If it's deductively invalid, it's not to be trusted. And the reason I belabor this so much is I look out there in the real world and I see all of those weapons being used against you and me, deliberately used by people who make 6 or 7 figures a year because they know how to do this. And I see us rolling over and playing dead because we have no weapons. Most of us even are aware of what's going on. You know that politicians lie, but you don't do anything about it. That's the point. We're even aware that this is going on, but we've devolved into such a helpless state that we don't know how to combat it. And I'm telling you, how you combat it is you take that native spark of intelligence and discernment that you have as a human being, and you develop that, and you strengthen that, and you make it good and beautiful, and then you can fight. But until you have weapons, even if you're in the fight and you know what's going on, you can't fight back because you got no weapons. And I'm dead serious about this, and it's a fight to the death. I'm quite serious about this. Whether that spark in you lives or dies depends on whether you support it, nurture it, challenge it, and make it grow, or whether you ignore it because you don't know how to make it grow, and it dies. It's that simple. And frankly, folks, we're losing the fight. And it's your generation that's going to have to fight to win. Okay, I'm sorry to be preachy at you, but I want to make sure that you understand the real point of this. It's not about identifying induction and deduction correctly. That's not our job here. We should try, but we're not trying because we want to get it right. We're trying because that makes us think about how we arrive at conclusions. Okay? So, play the game, take it seriously, but don't make yourselves crazy trying to figure out, well, this is deduction and that's induction, and get it absolutely right. That's not our point here. If you engage in the process of thinking about how we arrive at conclusions, you're sharpening and strengthening that native intelligence that you were born with. You're making it strong because you don't have $500 million to invest in the fight. The other side does. The other side has unlimited amounts of money to invest in winning this fight. And they're winning the fight because we're not fighting back. And we're not fighting back not because we're stupid. We're not fighting back because we have no weapons, because we failed to develop our weapons. And we think, well, okay, the Koch brothers have X numbers of billions of dollars, so naturally they're going to win the fight because they have all the money. That's fallacious. That's a lie. And yet we're believing that lie and jumping off the cliff to our intellectual death. It's that simple. So think about it. I'm going to send this to you. I hope this will clarify things for you a little bit. Try, but don't make yourself crazy. Think about it like a game. Think about it like a puzzle or something if you want. Don't make yourself crazy trying to identify the exact language here. Once you've tried to identify the exact language, then step back and reflect on what this was actually supposed to be about, and what may have happened inside your intellect by having the struggle. Okay, that's it. Wonderful weekend. I'm heading off to the river for a day, but I'll be back in harness Monday morning. Love you guys. Bye.